This podcast was recorded on October 22nd, 2017. By the time you hear it, things may have changed. Welcome to Black Women Talk Politics. I'm Sheila and Clark.
And I'm Sabriya Williams.
And we are back for another exciting week.
Exciting, sad, traumatizing, as most of the weeks under the Trump administration have tended to be. Like, nothing is ever going to just be regular anymore.
Well, it's not. I mean, I don't think regular is what we really have happening here.
This is our new normal, chaos.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, the last time we were here, we were talking about Vegas.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, and I think when we did this podcast, we were kind of reeling off the fact of that tragedy, and really saying, what else needs to happen before there's some action here,
Laws could be passed. What? Right.
Absolutely. I mean, lots of laws can be passed. There's more and more information coming out about what happened in Vegas, and the New York Times had this really interesting piece I was looking at last night that did a video. They looked at all these different concurrent videos that happened at the same time, and it was 12 rounds of firing on the people there, 12 rounds that went over the course of 10 minutes. And so it was just, a deadly, deadly event. And we know, as on our last show, we were talking about a bump stock, right? And this thing, a bump stock, was what people were saying was part of what made a semi-automatic become able to be used like an automatic weapon. And, there was all this kind of, this bump stock thing, what is it? What can we do about it, et cetera, et cetera. So, I am pleased to say that there was a bill that was introduced, the Automatic Gunfire Prevention Act, which is labeled S 1916 and HR 3999. It was introduced by Senator Dianne Feinstein, who's from California, who is a Democrat, and Representative Carlos Curbelo, who is a Republican in Florida, and it would ban bump stock devices. So this was introduced on October 4th. We have some bipartisan support for this, including Paul Ryan, who has come out in favor of this. However, unfortunately, what we know is that the media has, unfortunately, moved on to the next thing. The Trump administration has moved on to the next thing. And what we saw was, all this bipartisan conversation about, we have to do something.
Yeah, what's going to happen next?
But interestingly enough, you haven't heard much about Vegas. It's been 2 weeks, and now pretty much people are willing to move on to the next thing. And, I was on one of the sites that kind of tracks the bills and their progress, and they're saying this bill has a less than 1% chance of passing. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the NRA, who, if you recall, had come out before saying that they, would be in support of bump stocks being outlawed, has now reversed their position.
Of course they
did.
And
so this is just, one of the things that we said we know happens, and we were watching it happen right in front of our eyes. They've come out in opposition to this bill. And this bill solely does what, we had this concurrence that bump stocks should be illegal, but the NRA, if you look it up,
thinks everybody should have a bump stock.
They've come out against the bill, which means they're for bump stocks, which means, again, all those lives lost in Vegas, all those people injured, and we still have no reform in gun policy. And it's deplorable.
It is. And this is where we are, where the deplorable is the norm.
So people definitely should go search for this act. Write your Congress people,
write your reps,
tell them that you expect them to vote for this act, to advocate for this act. And also, this is just the beginning. A bump stock is, really that's a bone at the problem. They're throwing a bone at the problem. It's much more broad issue than a bump stock. But we could at least get this passed.
Right. So, moving on from the death in Vegas to now the death of our soldiers in Niger, who were killed over 2 weeks ago. We had, if you didn't know, there were 4 soldiers: Sergeant Brian Black, Sergeant LaDavid Johnson, Staff Sergeant Jeremiah Johnson, and Staff Sergeant Dustin Wright. They were killed in an apparent ambush. There were several soldiers that were why we're in Niger. That's part of the discussion that we're having. There's a lot of mystery surrounding why these soldiers were in Niger, even more mystery surrounding how they were killed and how they were ambushed, who was involved. They are on the border in Niger, between Niger and Mali, I believe, and they're, fighting, or not. They're not fighting. I believe that they are there to help teach the soldiers that are there how to fight against ISIS and other terrorist cells that might be there. And apparently they were going to meet with some of the Niger elders in a village when they were ambushed by 50 or so ISIS-affiliated fighters. And they had machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. They were fully armed, where our soldiers, it seems, were not. And that is where the call for an investigation has begun. And like I said, this happened 2 weeks ago. And this story is already horrific. But I think it's compounded by the fact that we don't know what's going on, what happened to these soldiers, why they were killed, why one soldier, LaDavid Johnson's body was found 48 hours after the actual gunfight happened, how he was separated from the other soldiers. It's a complicated, convoluted, sad story. Senator John McCain is asking for a probe into the Pentagon and what happened and what's going on. There are touts that this is Trump's Benghazi. It is a mess, and that's a sad story in and of itself. Mm-hmm. What makes it sadder is that on, I believe, Monday, when Donald Trump was asked in his daily briefing, why haven't you said anything? Why haven't we heard more about these 4 soldiers who were killed 2 weeks ago? Why isn't there more transparency? Why hasn't the White House put out a statement, even if it's a statement saying basically, we don't know, we'll let you know when we know? That, I think, is what the call was. When asked that, which seems like a very valid question, Donald Trump goes into how, look, the hardest part of his job is calling these families of fallen soldiers, and how basically President Obama and other presidents, most of them don't make the calls. A lot of them don't make the calls. He likes to make the call when it's appropriate. So again, because we are a country and a place that can be fact-checked, that's what happened. People started going on and saying, hey, no, President Obama, in fact, former Attorney General was like, stop lying. Eric Holder, in a tone and texture that I don't think ever he tweeted, and the first line was stop lying, talking about Donald Trump. Because of course, President Obama and other presidents, when appropriate, as Donald Trump said, they call. You make a call and that can be easily debunked. And it was. And so the next day, after this onslaught of debunking of what Trump said, the next morning in his morning radio interview that he does daily, I believe most presidents do, he went on and further to say how, ask John Kelly. Ask John Kelly, because President Obama did not, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly did not call when John Kelly's son was killed. And he's, former, John Kelly's our White House Chief of Staff, but he's also, former general in the military, and his son, he has one son that's, I believe, still active duty, and one son who was killed in 2011 in Afghanistan. And so here we are, the distractor in chief, who's now, instead of, saying, oh, you know what, maybe, we'll get you the information on what happened in Niger when we know what's happening. It's immediate defensive, I'm going to start spewing all these lies and dusting up all of this distraction from the real topic, which is how these soldiers were killed. Why were they killed? What can we do to prevent this from happening moving forward? No, I call everybody blah, blah. And bringing John Kelly, who's been very private and has never really spoken publicly about his son, as he should not, because I'm sure it's super painful. But he's now been thrown into this mix. And if that wasn't bad enough, I mean, Donald Trump does make the phone call. He calls all four of the soldiers that have passed. They calls her family. When he calls LaDavid Johnson's family, we had Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who was in the car, and she wasn't in there in the capacity as Congresswoman. And I want this to be debunked as if she was trying to do something to promote herself. She is a long-time family. She has a long history, decades of history with this family. She started a program. It's the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence project that she started in the Miami-Dade area, and it's a program that starts to help youth who are pursuing military careers and other types of careers. And so he had gone through her program, and he was one of her stars. And so immediately her knee jerk was when she heard that there were soldiers killed in Niger, she thought of him and was hoping it wasn't. It happened to be. So now,
actually, he had just graduated from her program.
Yeah. He rose to the ranks of sergeant very quickly. I mean, he was a superstar from her program, and honestly, a superstar for the country, because he is there. He is defending our rights, and so she's with the family and has been. She's there on the way to meet his body in Dover. As it's coming back from Dover to Miami, she's with his wife, and she's with his aunt and uncle who raised him, and his young children. And the call comes in from Donald Trump, and it's put on speakerphone because they're in the car, and of course you're getting a call from the president, no matter the circumstance. You may want other people to hear it, not for malicious reasons, which again this is now being touted as, and she believes that in the remarks that he made, one of the remarks that he made was he knew what he signed up for. But, when it happens, it hurts anyway. Now, yes, that could definitely be seen as insensitive, and he shouldn't have said it. And, Representative Wilson believed that it upset the wife even more, who had just found out that she was not going to be able to have an open casket for her husband. And so when she was being interviewed on MSNBC, I believe that's where I saw it, and she recounted this, and she couldn't, and she was like, I couldn't believe he said it. This was, it was horrible. I mean, and she was upset, and that's what she said, and then she went on. But the bigger picture is, why wasn't he found? Why was he left behind? Why was he found 48 hours later? Why were they there in the first place? So why were any of our soldiers killed? So that was the secondary. But of course, what has been the overriding theme is now Donald Trump is saying, no, I didn't say it. She's lying. I didn't say it. Why? And he has proof, because he always has proof. So it's not that he's just questioning, because then the aunt of LaDavid Johnson says, no, he did say it. And so with his repeated denial, instead of just saying, you know what, oops, I said it, I apologize, maybe, it was insensitive, and moving on, because again, we have a president that will never apologize, that is not in his DNA, that is not who he is, because he's never wrong. Everybody's always against him. He doesn't apologize. And so now we have this whirlwind of just drama, where now John Kelly is coming out on Thursday recounting, what happens when you find out your loved one has been killed in the line of duty, what in protecting our country, what happens, and how he found out that his son was killed, or how he's had to make that call, and how gut-wrenching it is. And saying that, yeah, people have said, to him about his son, yep, he knew what he signed up for. He was in the best place he wanted to be. My question with that is that John Kelly is military. And hearing that as military, that's a conversation you have, and you can take it in a certain way. But regular civilians, to come and say, it when it happened, when he knew what he signed up for, that's, that could be seen as insensitive. So he's explaining.
It's just always too interesting to me just how this administration wants to critique and criticize, but also be above reproach.
We're 1,000,000%. There's no. I mean, in the story, you see. I mean, I'm talking, and I feel like I've been talking forever, and it's so convoluted, and it's so because at the core of it is these 4 soldiers are dead. Why were they there? That's what we need to be talking about. That's where the conversation is. A private conversation between what is the president, giving his condolences to each family member, and them having the privacy and the decency to mourn in peace. God, I mean, LaDavia Johnson's wife has had no peace. Her husband his face is plastered on the TV screen every second of every day. If I see it here in D.C., can you imagine what's happening in Miami where he is from? I mean, there's no peace, but this is distraction, this cyclone of distraction that we're dealing with. And furthering it is John Kelly out and out lying, saying that he was at an event in Florida where an FBI building was being dedicated in 2015, and how Representative Wilson was making a speech, and she was bragging about how she got the money for the building, and then he referred to her as an empty barrel. So he's discrediting her for, basically recounting what she heard Donald Trump say. But since it wasn't, complimentary of him, then she has to be debunked because Donald Trump can do no wrong. Well, of course, when we do the fact checking, and I saw the speech that she gave, which was quite eloquent, where she thanked members of the Republican Party, Paul Ryan, for helping to make this happen, to get the building. In fact, the funding had already been taken care of before she was in office. That's fact checkable. And so she was not in the speech, did not mention one time. She was very complimentary of everybody in the room and how it was a bipartisan effort to get the building done, and how, without mentioning money once, she had every FBI agent in the room stand up and gave them the accolades that they deserved for the time. But that's going to all get swapped under the rug,
the
right?
The thing is that whenever, and just to go back to some of the things that we've been talking about, the pattern here, which is, be it Maxine Waters, be it the woman in Puerto Rico, now it's Frederica Wilson, women who have this history of service, and then, their
history being brown.
Right, and then they're, what happens is they become critical, and then, then just like using the bullying tactics that this whole administration is known for, then they try to make this person a laughingstock. But the thing about it is, like, even Sarah Huckabee Sanders was like, all hat, no cattle, or something like that. Yeah. But here's the thing. Representative Wilson has a long history of being not just involved in her community, but also critical of the government when necessary. Yep. I mean, there's conversation about how she was critical of George Bush with the weapons of mass destruction when one of the young people in her community died. With Trayvon Martin, she's been working very closely with his brother.
Absolutely.
And was very critical of what, that's another thing that happened, in Florida, right? So she was very involved in that. She has been
she's a proven record of service.
Public service.
I mean,
she's been, some of the issues with the gun violence and the homicides in Miami in 2006. She was very involved. She's actually had 3 or more members of her 5,000 Role Models initiative died tragically,
she said that.
And each time she's utilized that as another opportunity to try to wake people up to some type of action. So, I think it's really important for us who are women, and for us who are Black women or women of color, to not to, and really women everywhere, to not feed into what they want us to feed into, which is, this is just another crazy woman, right. And because, that wears a big, trying to make a character of her, versus looking at
what her record is,
what she's really done. And guess what? She has the absolute right to be critical of the president. And as a matter of fact, this whole notion of, are you going to question a 4-star general? Well, not that I go with Lindsey Graham, but he was like, yeah, in America, we get to do that.
We get to question anybody.
We get to question whoever we want about whatever we want. And
he is a 4-star general, but right now you are the White House chief of staff. So that's who you are. That is the capacity that you are serving in, and when you are serving that capacity,
Trump questioned the president of the United States
daily
again and again.
No, he questioned his birthright.
He questioned everything. So anyway, it's not to go off about him, but yes, you do get to be questioned. Yes, we need some transparency. Next week they're going to come forward to the to the Senate, and the Armed Services Committee is going to be briefed, and hopefully there'll be some light shed on this. But in the meantime, this mess again,
it's a mess.
And
we have to remember that she again was not there for any political reason at all. In that limousine when she was going there as a friend of the family and as a comforter. So she was not seeking. They knew that the call was coming, but I'm sure it was not her intent to be there. I'm sure after all this, she would have liked probably not to have been in the car at this point. But to make it as if she was doing this for some self-serving reason, which the administration is just untrue, and it's unfounded and sad. And so moving on to where, again, keeping with topic and theme on how women have been
degraded.
Abused.
The degradation of women who are public figures.
Never ending. We have Harvey Weinstein, who is Weinstein. He and his brother have one of the largest production companies in Hollywood, where now we have 58 women who've come forward to say that he is sexual misconduct and even rape. And there was a audio tape of him, that the New York Police Department had. They had this, and still he was not charged. And it shows how men with money and power, including our president, can be sexual predators and nothing come of it. Where he is on tape asking a woman to just come sit there, and she's telling him, no, I don't want to, and asking him, why did you touch my breast? It's disgusting. Not unlike our president talking about that he could grab women by the vaginas, and that's where we are. So you have Harvey Weinstein. That's where we started the week on Monday, and Fox 5 and every other now outlet, as we should, were, going off when you come up with all the settlements. So you have, and these, and not that it matters who the woman is, but apparently it does matter. So now when you have Oscar winners, Gwyneth Paltrow, Lupita Nyong'o, and Angelina Jolie saying, yes, he's done it to me, then people perk up, right? So the poor woman who was on the audio tape, she wasn't, didn't have credentials enough to be heard. But now you have Angelina Jolie and Gwyneth Paltrow and Lupita, and people are now taking a closer look and they're listening. And for however it gets done, we're happy that he's getting done. We're happy that he's now been removed from the board. We're hoping that criminal charges are levied against him. But unfortunately, there are statutes of limitation, and these charges are going back 20 years and more in some cases. And so, he has 58 women. Bill O'Reilly, now, we're going to fast forward to Friday, where it comes out that, and we knew because he was removed from Fox News in April. And apparently at that time, we knew that there were 5 women that were paid over $13 million out for his harassment. That's what we knew, and that's why he was fired then. We find out that now in August, they settled. We found out that, well, it was reported that Fox News settled a $32 million harassment suit for one person against Bill O'Reilly. Fox News has been very quiet about this. And I wish that they would give the zeal and zest that they did over Harvey Weinstein, because it's just as disgusting and just as despicable. But you have to wonder what happened to that poor woman that she was given $32 million. Do you know, if you go especially with big companies, when you file a sexual harassment or a harassment suit, they lowball you. They start you off maybe about $1,000. That's what they're going to come to you, go to your lawyer with if you have lawyered up. That's where they start, about $1,000. What in the holy hell did he do to this poor, I mean, for $32 million.
Well, she had been working there for 15 years, so he probably did a whole lot of different
I mean,
things.
can you imagine the trauma that she might, I mean, we're, and this is where we are. So we have these men of power who feel like, and let's not forget the Fox News chairman, Roger Ailes, was forced to resign in 2016 because of his disgusting behavior. And these are these men of power who believe that they have the right to do anything they want. And we are their property. And when I say we, I mean women. They can do, what do I tell my daughter who heard in last October when Trump was with Billy Bush, and they were going over his disgusting rant about how he can get any woman he wants, and then weeks later he becomes our president. What are we saying? What is the message that's being sent here?
Well, I think that, it's really, because I was really frustrated with this whole Harvey Weinstein thing, only because we have our president. There was, I don't know the number. Was it 7? Was it 15? I don't remember how many women that it was.
14. Donald Trump has 14.
Right.
active
And
cases,
everybody wanted to excuse it, co-sign. Oh, this is locker room talk. Oh, I don't really believe that he said that. Oh, all the people that cast the vote for him. Yet, Harvey Weinstein is now this pariah. And I'm not saying that he shouldn't be. Of course he should be.
1 million%.
But I'm just saying the blasphemy, the hypocrisy of it all. I mean, it's like Donald Trump said. He said, when you have money, you can do it. And unfortunately, it's sad to say, but in some ways, his words have been proven true. And
just like he said, if he had gone in the middle of Times Square and shot somebody, he's Teflon. He would still be president. That he has proven that.
So for women who are still standing by this man, yet demonizing this other man who did the same thing, you really have to check yourself. It's not different. If it's Bill O'Reilly, if it's Harvey Weinstein, if it's Donald Trump, if it's Bill Cosby, it's the same thing. And so as women, we have a response. I mean, there's all these hashtags like no more, or never me or whatever, me too, whatever it is, right? And it's like, great, but
if we were to sit here and have a conversation about times we can think where people have been sexually inappropriate to us men, growing from whatever age, I mean, it's a lifespan that we have to deal with, that we have to be nervous of walking down the street, and it's a fear that we don't talk about, and because people don't believe you, or they're going to question, what did you have on? What were you doing to get that attention, or to be harassed, or to be even sexually assaulted? And that is a mindset that needs to be changed before any of this can be corrected.
And the mindset needs to be changed in the mind of women. Yeah. Because I think there are lots and lots of men who already believe what we're talking about here, and maybe there are some that don't. But as women, we are uniquely positioned. I mean, it's like you had that young woman who was on Blossom, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't even pronounce her name, but the show Blossom back in the day, right?
She's on a show now. It's on CBS. Really
her name is Maya Blacknick or something like that.
I'm gonna get it because
she came out with this op-ed in the New York Times this week, and she basically said, well, not that I'm condoning it, but as women, we have to be careful, and we shouldn't do this, and we shouldn't wear that. And so, of course, everyone was like, what are you talking about? Right. But, if you are a woman that has, frowned at another woman for what she wore, but you didn't say anything to her, right? Or if you talked about...
Maya Bialik, I believe that's
right. It's like we want to be on one side and say we're these staunch feminists, but at the same time, we co-sign the behavior of men that we know is totally the opposite of what feminist principle is, right? And so I just feel like the people that voted for Trump, that excused his behavior, that did locker room talk, I don't think you get to talk about Harvey Weinstein. I forbid you from talking about him because you already cast your vote. Yep. So we don't believe you. And if you do think what Harvey Weinstein did was terrible and you voted for Trump, I ask you to ask yourself, how is it different?
How is it different?
And be real with yourself about it, because it's not.
Because Harvey Weinstein is a Democrat. That was
interesting too, right? It's interesting too, but of course, everyone.
Liberal. That's what's. And that's how sick. That's how sick we are. We're because this goes against party line. And Republican women have been victims. I'm sure that most of the women Bill O'Reilly were sexually assaulting in his office were probably like-minded. So it goes across party lines. We as women have to stand up and be women and be not women, but be what am I thinking? Lost my train of thought.
We need to have some solidarity.
And solidarity and just and compassion for one another in a way that
because we don't even defend each other when someone says, this person touched me the wrong way or made a pass at me or whatever, and it was uncomfortable. We can't even in ourselves say, that was wrong, and you should do something about it, and we just want to say, just forget about it, sweep it under the rug. I'm not saying it's not difficult, particularly within the context of your career, but
you still must, right? You
must, and also too, you can't vote for people that basically say that that's fine, because that's what this man said. That's why Bill O'Reilly supports him. That's why Roger Ailes supports him. That's why, Harvey Weinstein, of course, supported Clinton, but point being that you have this group, of men, Billy Bush, whoever else, Steve Bannon, all those people, that's what they believe, that's who they support. So
and we're going back to the women that what is it, the 52% of white women that, middle class women that voted for Donald Trump even after the tape came out, and agreeing, like you said, going with it as a locker room. They agreed. So it wasn't only his male counterparts, but women believed that it was just, and so women who are raising these boys are believing that locker room talk is okay. And so we also have however we're going to be responsible for, speaking up and standing up. We also have to raise boys and men to understand that this behavior is not okay, and locker room talk is not locker room talk. That is sexual assault. And we have to be very clear with our boys on what that is and how they should behave themselves respectfully towards women at all times, period. There is no room for error.
The Women's Suffrage Act, or what have you, is about to turn 100, right? I was at something earlier this week, and they just talked about how we're about to hit this milestone, and what has changed and what will change moving forward. I mean, in the years there, we're just recently the Treasury put out the first woman that was going to be on currency, right? I mean, it's ridiculous to think that we are about to have the first woman ever on currency. Well, it makes sense within the context of our presidents and political leaders continue to think of women as sexual property.
Yeah,
so,
that's exactly right.
I mean, it's we can't be all progressive and then co-sign the foolishness on the other side.
Because we're not it's a shallow progression, right? It's makeshift. We're going to show you that this is what we do, but behind closed doors, or not even behind closed doors, we're going to still do this in your face. We're going to, elect a man who's inept into office, besides one of the most qualified candidates to ever come up, like her or not. Her CV was on point with regard to having this position that she was denied because, people needed a penis in the office.
Well, speaking of hypocrisy, and just, things that don't make sense. So the FBI terrorism unit recently came out and said that black identity extremists pose a violent threat. Right. And so, it's ironic because, basically a black identity I don't know who that is.
It's not even real. They're making things up. Meanwhile, they have taken who've they taken off the FBI's terrorism list,
right? They've taken off all the far right, the KKK and all those those organizations, and that happened in February. So those organizations came off the list, and black identity extremists went on the list. And so this is a report that came out in August, but there was a recent article in The Guardian that was published, and they asked for some additional clarification. So that's why I kind of hit the news cycle this week. But the FBI assesses that it is very likely, this is according to the Domestic Terrorism Analysis Unit, the FBI assesses that it is very likely that black identity extremists' perceptions of police brutality against African Americans spurred an increase in premeditated, retaliatory, lethal violence against law enforcement and will very likely serve as justification for such violence. And then incidents of alleged police abuse have continued to feed the resurgence in ideologically motivated violent criminal activity within the BIE movement. So one of the issues I had with this was, they're trying to downgrade, they're basically saying, the perception, the false perception, the perceived thought that there is increased police brutality against African Americans, which we all know that's a fact. So there is no that's factually what happens, right? And then saying that therefore, because these groups are basically bringing it to people's attention, because that's all that's happening
doing,
here.
right? Because they're not going into Charlottesville killing people,
right? So because there's groups that are bringing it to folks' attention that there's an increase in premeditated, retaliatory, lethal, that means deadly violence against law enforcement, right? And so. And all of these marches that we've seen, these meetings that we've seen, whether it be Black Lives Matter or your local civic organization, I am not aware of any type of organized response to police that's violent.
Yeah, none.
There are a lot of conversations about how police and community should work together, largely academic, largely peaceful. Yes, have there been some things that have happened? Yes, there have been, right? But premeditated, retaliatory, and lethal, no. That's fake news, And so,
however, if you go all the way to the right and you see what they've done, and the groups that even since January 20th, what's happened since this guy's been elected in office, and how the resurgence or this underbelly has now come to the surface. And yet again, that is being because it's been amanned and co-signed, and that some Nazis are good per the president. There's been nothing about this, but you're going to try and target and make this fictitious thing up. I mean, I hadn't even heard of this. Black identity extremist is nothing. It is nothing. And I would dare you to come back and say that there is something there, something more threatening than the white supremacist movement that has actually happened, that has actually taken lives this year.
Right. It's to try to create some parity between, the KKK and their nationalists.
Yeah, they need to make it
white
even.
Supremacists. Right. And
so they say we have this because we have that, and
yeah,
that
or
is
to try to
take.
create some, and as other people have said, first of all, it's not new. I mean, we had the Black Panthers, we had Malcolm X, we had other people that were on this watch list, right? Yeah. So we know that there's always been a concern by the federal government when we have outspoken, active Black people that people listen to, right?
Yep.
And so what they'll try to do is, so like in this scenario, they try to use that guy, Micah Johnson, who was the young man, and he was a black man who killed 5 police officers in Dallas, right? But he was not co-signed or authorized
by anybody, and he was not a part of a movement. He was not his crazy self.
Right, so he just did that on his own, right? But they're going to tie, unlike Richard Spencer or when the Charlottesville thing, where that was all part of that alt-right of a organized activity. So here, to me, this is concerning, because as a Black person who is very much interested in economic justice and social justice and eliminating discrimination. Mm-hmm. So does that mean because I'm outspoken and because I have an opinion and because I'm not going to be okay with Black people being killed disproportionately, that now I'm a Black identity extremist? It's a way that
I would love to be on that list.
Yeah,
just for speaking out. Absolutely.
But the list is terrible. Like, you're on this list, and that's how they use this list as a way to tap your phone, tap your bank account. Like, it's just a way for them to try to snuff it out.
Right.
This list should not be here. Richard
Spencer should have he should be on the list. Steve Bannon should be on the list. Countless people
everybody
that goes
to those Charlottesville rallies should be on the list.
Right. I'm sure nobody from Friday's rally in Florida is on the list.
So this Black identity extremist, this list that's targeting and coming up with a way to justify saying that Black Lives Matter or whatever group you're in. I don't even know if it's this podcast. You're an extremist. It's really concerning. It's labeling and again, false labeling and fake news.
So we'll have to watch it. We'll see. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how much play the Black identity extremists get over the true threat, the true murderers of the year, which Heather Heyer is on the list of people that were murdered this year by white extremists. We'll see how that goes. We'll see if there's any, law and order that actually, and balance that goes with that.
Right. I guess the last thing I wanted to talk about quickly before we moved on to our guest was, there is still some movement with the ACA. So Donald Trump, the passing things through Congress has failed terribly. So now he's back to his old ways of the executive order. And so, and this is a way that the president, with his the types of power that he has. We talked earlier in the podcast about the travel bans and things like that. So the executive order is a way by which the president can kind of push out his agenda.
Isn't this the same guy who used to talk about Obama's executive order? All he does is executive order. All he does is executive order. He can't get anything done. Interesting. Go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Well, that's fine. He said that. Well, actually, Obama used the executive order way more than any other presidents before him. So he found a method that worked. And I guess Trump, he is a follower. So, so basically, he's in his executive order. He said he was going to withhold the cost-sharing subsidy that the government currently pays insurance companies, and those subsidies help to reduce deductibles and co-pays for many low-income people, right? So basically, the individuals that get these subsidies are people who are financially challenged, and by the government failing to pay for those or saying they will no longer pay for them, it's going to make the cost go up, right? So of course, understanding that the consumer may not be able to pay, that the companies are going to be losing money, and this will undoubtedly result in companies leaving the Obamacare exchanges, and or the costs going up in such a way that more Americans are saying this is unaffordable, and of course it is, because this is not how it was set up. It was set up to have a subsidy to make sure that the person that was economically challenged didn't have to pay so much out of pocket. So this is kind of a little backdoor way to try to sneak in his agenda.
And screw poor people.
Right, and so absolutely. And so, this is the way that he's going to get more pressure on Senate and Congress, and also on the average person to say this thing doesn't work. So, it's sabotaging the ACA. So I think what we'll see from him is more little moves like this. I'm not going to pay for this. There was this other thing about, we're not going to let people continue to enroll.
Right.
I think that came out a couple weeks ago. So we just have to continue to watch. And I think that Congress does have the ability, to counter some of these moves, and so I think, again, going back to what the ACT UP is we need to go ahead and tell our Congress people that that's not acceptable.
No.
Our Americans need these subsidies. They're important to keep the healthcare system working. We don't want insurers to leave the marketplace. We don't want consumers to have to pay more. Leave it intact until you come up with something better. Don't just dismantle it piece by piece, and then when it implodes, say, see, it sucked in the first place, right? So that's kind of the news on the ACA this week.
Right. I mean, because Schumer's bipartisan health care bill, it has the majority. So they did come. What he did after with the executive order was he made Congress. He made them come together, and they came up with a bipartisan bill that he was initially going to sign, and now he's saying he's not going to sign because it's going to make it look bad, because it's more of the Democrats who did it than it was the Republicans, and so he's just playing this political game. And meanwhile, people are getting sicker and sicker, and healthcare is, in a spiral. So I'm not understanding why you wouldn't want the bipartisan. I think things get done if we're doing it together, as opposed to trying to, have the right against the left. But again, just be on your representative. Make sure they're doing right by you and your folks, because this president is definitely not. It's not his goal.
So we have a really special guest coming up today. Teri Walker is joining us.
Fellow Terp,
attorney extraordinaire from Fulton County, Georgia. So I'm really looking forward to having Teri come on and talk with us. So let's give her a call. I'm so excited. We have Teri Walker here. Teri is one of my sorors from College Park chapter, Kappa Phi. Hey, Teri, how are you?
Go Terps.
All is well.
So excited. Well, here at Black Women Talks Politics, we always try to have women who are doing big things. And, of course, Teri's joining us. Teri, just to tell you a little bit about her, Teri Walker is a career prosecutor with over 12 years of experience, as well as several years as a defense attorney. She's worked in 3 solicitor offices, solicitors' offices. That's a mouthful right there. The City of Atlanta, Fulton County, and Dekalb County as a Senior Assistant Solicitor General. She has prosecuted over 5,000 cases, including hundreds of domestic violence and DUI cases. Currently, she's the Assistant District Attorney with Fulton County. In her current position, she handles cases post-conviction and argues cases in front of the Supreme Court of Georgia and the Georgia Court of Appeals. Welcome, Teri.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello, ladies
Well, we are
and gentlemen.
right, and gentlemen. Right? Well, Teri,
Right.
the first thing, I'm sure this isn't a new question to you, but can you tell all of our listeners, what is a Solicitor General?
Absolutely. In the state of Georgia, there are two types of prosecutors. There's one called the Solicitor General, and the other one is called a District Attorney. The Solicitor General handles misdemeanor cases in Georgia, and those are cases where you can't receive, they're state charges where you can't receive more than a year in jail or a $1,000 fine. Felonies, in general, are cases where you can receive more than a year in jail and a higher fine over $1,000. There's some exceptions generally, but for the most part, those two offices are separated. And there are over 150 counties in the state of Georgia, but each county does not have a district attorney and a solicitor general. A lot of times it's based on the population. So some districts have like one or two different small counties joined together. They would not necessarily have a solicitor. The district attorney has what's called right of first refusal. The district attorney can handle felonies and misdemeanors. But in some counties, they have a solicitor and a district attorney, and they're both elected. And I ran in 2012 and in 2016 for Fulton County Solicitor General.
Well, thank you so much. That's helpful, because I had no idea
Right, what the distinction was. Absolutely me either.
Right.
So what are the challenges for running for political office? What are some of them, especially as a woman and then an African-American woman?
I think for us, believe it or not, I think it's just stepping up to the challenge. And once you remove the mental block that I'm worthy to run because I have something important to say, I have an experience that I need to share, I have a skill set that is necessary, and despite maybe not knowing anyone in my family who's been a public official or elected official, I may not necessarily know the past. And that can be a hindrance, I think, sometimes for Black women, where you may not feel worthy enough to run, not because you don't have something to offer, but you don't always see a clear pathway to how do I run for public office. And I will say that being a Black female in Atlanta, I've had the privilege, all of the elected officials that I've ever worked with have been Black. And two or three were females, so it's a unique experience for me where that wasn't really a hindrance for me to not have a role model in the sense of having seen someone who looks like me run for public office or even be appointed. I think in that respect I was kind of blessed to have seen both scenarios. So my motivation and inspiration for running for public office, although the seed was planted back when I was in Maryland, believe it or not, I always had a clear path of, this is definitely something that I want to pursue.
Right. So basically just putting yourself in the room, believing that you can do it, and then just making it happen.
Absolutely. There is a certain level of organic believing in yourself, but then there is the tactician side. There is the business of politics,
Absolutely.
Which a lot of people don't really want to accept, but it is scientific, and it costs money.
Yeah.
And that information, that data is available, but people think that, if I could just get the manpower. Look, grassroots looks fun. President Barack Obama made it seem like an easy task, but he outspent his competitors. He was able to activate grassroots because he had the money to do it.
Right.
And so with that said, if you are willing to raise money, and if that means going into your personal finances, I don't suggest taking out loans, but I would question whether you really want to run if you are squeamish about asking people for their support in terms of financial support.
Mm-hmm.
How could you ask them to vote for you when you can't ask them to support? Because with the smallest of financial investment into your campaign has large loyalty dividends, because if people give you money, more than likely, they don't vote for you.
Right.
They're going to advocate for you.
Right.
So it's up for you to ask.
You talked about the seeds being planted, even when you were a college student at Maryland, and it's so funny because we always have these conversations with people about how did they get where they were, right? And so what were some of those initial seeds that you saw as a younger person that made you realize, hey, I can do this, I want to do this?
Well, I was really active in the Black Student Union, so I ran for North Hill representative, so that was the first taste of politics. But while I was at Maryland, I did an internship with Senator Gloria Lawler, who was a Maryland state senator, and had an opportunity to see the legislative process up close and personal. You can't be that close to the nation's capital and not catch and not feel the political bug.
Right.
Just to be right there, if nothing else, to see the monuments and just recognize all of the, politics at play, and even just, reading the newspaper every day and everything just being, it's not even gossip, it's just, you're just part of the whole political process. The Black Congressional Caucus, being able to attend events there, having different elected officials come to Maryland, it was just a perfect recipe for me to want to be involved in politics. But even further than that, my father was the finance director for the city of Cleveland, and he was appointed, and interestingly enough, the first mayor that appointed him was actually a Republican, and he was able to serve under different mayors from different political backgrounds. So I really think subconsciously working for the government and the city, that seed was planted from watching my father's political career, even though it was one through appointment, not running for a public office.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's helpful.
That is. You have a very interesting perspective, having been a prosecutor and a defense attorney. Based on your experiences, what reforms do you think are needed in the criminal justice system, having been on both sides?
I'll tell you, it's more of a spiritual issue with me. I saw both perspectives. I saw my role catered to that specific position I was in, but to me it boils down to, before we get to the macro level of criminal justice reform, we have to deal with the micro issue of personal responsibility and then cultural responsibility. And I will say this, as a Black female who represented Black young men as a defense attorney, we need, and I say we as a community, need to spread this word. We need to stop committing crimes against each other, because the majority of crimes that are committed are intra-racial. And I'm not saying, so I'm going to go fight somebody from another race. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the first step is stop committing crimes against your own community member. Can we stop that? Stop putting your hands on your brother, your sister, for $5 worth of crack, a pork chop because he spoke to you, stepped on your tennis shoes, robbing people for minor things, for anything at all. I'm that's just the basis. That's not the totality of my comment. Right. So before we get into reform, if in fact you are not committing crime, then we are not dealing with necessarily over-policing, because then you can see the over-policing when, well, these men are at home, or they're on their way to work, or this community doesn't commit crime against each other. Then you can see, well, when these people are incarcerated, that this is really a money-making scheme. That penal institutions really are about paying for people to have jobs. But if you don't get back to the fundamental root of stop committing crime, and I'm not talking about minor traffic offenses, I'm not talking about mistakes. There is a criminal element that is intentional. I'm going out and I'm getting into something because I don't have a job, I don't have anything else better to do, and it's because that's the lifestyle I choose.
Right. Yeah, that sense of personal responsibility is really important.
It's key.
I think it gets complicated too, though, by things like poverty and things of that nature. But I think at the core, particularly for us as mothers, and women, it resonates with us that, we're all trying to, I would think, promote that within our children about accountability and consequences and choice, right? So,
socially,
yes. And look, I'm not referring to, and I don't like the word victimless crimes. I'm not talking about somebody who's hungry and they go into a Walmart to get something to eat. That's a different issue. Right. But some of the crime I'm talking about, and actually crime against a Walmart is not racial. That is socioeconomic. When you're talking about I'm stealing food and Similac and something for my child, and you can tell that's what it is because what the person walked out with, you can tell like, oh, they're trying to have necessities of life. But when you begin to kidnap people, rob people for jewelry, that is the type of crime that I'm talking about. Right. That is completely different. And that is when you start to see the moral decay of a community. Like, why are you kidnapping somebody's mama over a $500 weed transaction that didn't go well?
Right.
That's what I'm...
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So one of the things, when you're talking about misdemeanors in particular, but potentially felonies too, I don't know. I'm curious to hear what you think. But, there's been a lot of conversation about bail bond reform. There's been a lot of conversation about people being arrested for relatively minor infractions, or at least this is how it's talked about anyway. So I'm really happy you're here so you can kind of debunk any myths and also talk with us about what you think it should look like. But there's all this conversation about, people sitting in jail because they don't have the money to pay to get out on bail. Therefore they sit in jail, over something relatively minor. They lose their job, et cetera, and it just spirals into, other societal issues. What do you think bail bond reform should look like? Does it need to be reformed? And if so, like in what way?
Yeah, that's another broad issue, and that's not a criticism. It's just like, wow, what comes forward first, the chicken or the egg? And I still go back to, how about not commit crime where you have to, you have to post bail or bond? But aside from those issues where you find yourself in a situation where you are charged, it circles back to who are your local elected officials that think it's okay to excessively charge. Okay, let me back up. I'm getting excited. In Georgia, the sheriffs of each county are the ones who give the licenses or the okay for the bail bondsman company. Okay. I can't, as Teri Walker on my own, say, hey, I'm opening up free at last bail bonding company, which, by the way, is a real company, but I can't do that. I'm going to say, Delta's for life. We can get out for life, whatever. I can't just decide that's the business I want to go into. You have to get the okay from the sheriff, okay?
Okay.
A lot of people may not understand that there are other jobs that a sheriff has other than being a jailer. But if you're not paying attention to your local elected officials, you're not watching the flow of money and or contract. So, you've got this company that by law has to be started or given a license through the county. Then you need to look at who's getting these licenses, okay? Mm-hmm. And then when these people are charging bond, are they following what the statute provides? Then you have to watch, well, is it really working? Are these people actually being held accountable? In other words, those who are charged and using these bonds companies to post 10% of whatever the bail is or bond that's set, are these people really coming to court? Because this is the thing. If people abscond and don't go to court, that bond company is on the hook for that.
Oh, wow.
And people don't understand that it's an investment, and there is a risk, a huge risk involved with it. And then there's some other situations, there's 5 phase where, people don't show up for court because they're picked up in other counties and all sorts of stuff. So it's a more sophisticated transaction. But at its root, the issue is, should somebody sit in jail for not being able to make bond and miss out on a job or other things? On the surface, I would say no. But there are people in our community across the nation, in Fulton County, who commit crime, and their movement needs to be limited. They aren't productive to begin with. They're terrorizing the community, and if they can't make bail or bond, that's on them. Because a lot of times we're talking about factors of recidivism. In other words, they are repeat offenders. They are likely to recommit and or intimidate witnesses and not come to court. And you need to factor that. So, is it worth us holding that person in jail, which in Fulton County costs taxpayers about $125 a day to house someone in Fulton County jail, or do we let them loose? There's another thing to balance, and then this whole thing about people losing jobs. If this is a blip, I just don't see. And I'm not saying your life doesn't go completely down the drain, but if you are constantly late, always got an issue, and you get arrested this one time, it's just one of many factors that kind of made you maybe. And I'm saying this broad stroke, you was at risk anyway at your job. I'm just saying.
How does it get determined, Teri, how much the bond is, though? Like, how does that determination, it's $1,000 for you and $10,000 for somebody else?
It's for Georgia, it's statutory. There's some guidelines.
Oh, okay.
There's some guidelines. And then let me give you the flip of that. There have been some people who've been charged with murder who've been let out and they go and murder again.
Interesting.
Right.
They've been
given signature bonds because the jail is overcrowded.
Oh.
And so they go out and they're like, oh, I get another bite at the apple. Oh, and they go out and murder somebody else. And so the judge has egg on their face, but what? The judge is still reelected because nobody is holding that person accountable because they don't really understand what they're saying, what they've done by, oh, well, the jail is overcrowded. And I'm talking about Fulton County because that's what I know. So, and I'm not advocating, social upheaval. I'm just saying there's some accountability that is available if people would follow the breadcrumbs. If you start looking at the whole picture, it's more than just one isolated issue. Because this is the thing: in order for a person in Georgia to get a certain bond amount, you have to have a hearing, and that hearing takes into consideration, your ties to the community, what you're charged with, the likelihood that you would reoffend, will you intimidate witnesses, will you appear back in court? And this is just, the law says, balance these factors. And if we think that you're probably going to do these and you're going to intimidate somebody, we're going to set the bond at a certain amount. And the reality of it is, the person who's incarcerated is not the one that's paying the bond most of the time. It's their grandmama, because it's usually black men.
Right.
Or the baby mama, and I'm just being 100 with that. And so when these men are incarcerated, who's putting their credit card into this machine or this mechanism for those men to be able to make phone calls? It's black women.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen to other. I'm just talking about the community that I know.
Yeah. In a way, because for me, I'm TV. I Law and Order is my show, and so hearing you sort of detail this in a way that you don't think about and how involved it really is, and to know that these are the grandmothers and the baby mamas and these folks who are having to come up with the money, and going back to your first point of having the accountability of the community so that these crimes are not even happening, then we aren't even here talking about bail bonds reform in the first place, because then it's not needed. Wow. I've got
an extreme example, but in Atlanta, Uber is huge. We love the idea of, I don't have to get on the highway. When you want to get into Midtown, you want to be in Buckhead, you want to enjoy yourself, you just take Uber. It's not really to work, it's just to socialize. Right. And I read on Facebook, what would happen if black men stayed in the house or took Uber? In other words, they were not driving. So those instances of black men being stopped in these vehicles, the top performance vehicles for no reason, you got all these black men who are Ubering out, or they're in the house. Self-set up. What would happen if, as a community, we were like, 10 o'clock, we in the house? What would that do to the crime statistics? What if everybody's in the house 10 o'clock, shopping done, everything in the house, nobody's out on the street? What if we're not committing crime? Let's have a week of suspended crime and see what the stats look like. They would force reform simply because a lot of petty criminal behavior has an economic impact. And more so than our money that we use in the entertainment industry, our money is being used in penal institutions and other ways that we didn't realize. We just didn't realize we're not following the money that way.
Wow. Okay, I guess I'm going to ask now another multi-layered question, and it's on expungement policies, and they differ from state to state. What do progressive expungement policies look like, and why is it important to communities disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system?
I have an interesting perspective on that personally. My question is, and this is rhetorical, would you want to know if somebody who was charged of raping somebody but not convicted, would you want to know, as an employer, would you want to know that? And if you were the person who was charged, of course you wouldn't want people to know that. But I'm asking these broad questions because in some instances, supposedly, like your credit, your criminal history is telling of your personality, which sometimes I do and don't agree with. Georgia has recently reformed its expungement policy to take it out of the discretion of the local elected officials because there were inconsistencies in who was getting certain things expunged. I'll just put it that way.
Right.
And in Georgia, it would affect, in some instances, your ability to vote, employment, because have you been convicted of certain things was a gateway question to employment applications. So people were weeded out just based on that preliminary question. So I do think it was good for the state to make it uniform. Like, no, if your case has been dismissed for these reasons, it needs to be expunged and not up to the discretion of the local politician. But I will say, as a person who rents out property, there's things that I want to know about people. And I'm not really sure that your criminal history should necessarily be the way that I get it, but there are some things that you kind of want to know about people. Now, whether we really are entitled to it, that's the bigger issue.
Right.
And, having had relatives and friends who have paid their debt to society, who've been charged, they have served their time, they have paid their fines, but yet and still have this scarlet letter, so to speak, around them. And it's kind of like they don't get a second chance. And I don't know if that's really what we intended as well.
Right.
So, that's a big issue because there are what we're really talking about is propensity.
Right.
Okay, because you did this before,
right.
Are you going to do it again?
Right.
But even in a court of law, propensity is not admissible. Right. You'd be like, only in certain instances can we really get into, your past like that. So, there's some pros and cons to it. I get both sides.
Well, I was going to say, Teri, especially like when you're talking about people's arrest records, and you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, right? And knowing that black men are at a higher probability of being arrested, by bias or affiliation or whatever, you know what I mean? So then I think, to me, I think for certain, anything that was dismissed, should be good. Like you said, maybe we might want to know, but it's really not our business, I think that's my opinion, seeing how, like you said, just the mere thought that you were, or just the mere knowledge that a person was arrested, many, many times people assume they were guilty, and then they will certainly use that against them. So I think it's really important on the premise of, particularly if you're not convicted. And then if you are convicted, I guess it's a little different because maybe you were found guilty, but depending on what it is also, you talked earlier about like the whole notion of a mistake. Now, I don't want to be disrespectful in any way to anyone has been a victim of a DUI. I really don't at all, because I know that lives have been lost and all of that kind of stuff. But I'll just use that as an example of something that people could say was a mistake, particularly if no one, no lives were lost or something like that. I don't know. I mean, that's dicey and everything, but when there are things that happen that people, for instance, you see people, I know in my line of work, I see people who did stuff when they were in their early 20s, and it's like 60 years old, still carrying that charge around, and it makes it very difficult for them to move forward. And now these are much more severe crimes, but how long do you have to carry that around with you? Are you just doomed forever to be known by what you did when you were 24, 21, 22. Even some states where at 18 you can be convicted as an adult. You know what I mean?
Yes, and Georgia is on your 17th birthday. You know, like 16 is early. And, I mean, you're absolutely correct. And it also brings me back to the point of, you know, running for public office and knowing, you know, early that you want to live a lifestyle that is worthy of public scrutiny. You know, sometimes having goals that are very, very high will keep you from getting involved in situations that you have to be explaining all the time. I mean, I remember, you know, when I was sitting for the bar, you have to do a fitness background check, and everyone wanted to know about credit, anything that happened when you were juvenile, even things that were expunged or sealed. They want to know. Part of it, they wanted to know if you were going to be honest enough to admit it. But two, they wanted to know the type of people that we are admitting into the state bar. There's some professions where you hold certain clearances. You know, you have to divulge that. Even though it took place, it's expunged, it's been removed from your record, and I'm going to put a pin in what that really means, because I have to revisit that. But it's one of those things where these things can haunt you from having made mistakes as a child. And Georgia has a very early age of what they consider an adult, so you need to be careful. But when you talk about arrest records, that's important to have those expunged, especially if the case has been dismissed out or it's timed out where you were arrested for something and they never did anything with it. That needs to come off of your arrest history. Because in an election context, somebody could find that and then start digging for the police report that was generated by the arrest. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's important that you are understanding of how information is maintained, but then also arrest history at a certain level. In Georgia, prosecutors are given a certain clearance to look into people's criminal history, and only for the limited purposes of sentencing and having to deal specifically with an assigned case, not just me. I think I want to see what my friend Cece's criminal history looks like.
Right.
That is a felony. You can't do that.
Right.
But what happens is there's certain clearance. So even if that case was expunged, my understanding is that even at the federal level, they can still see it.
Right.
Employers can't see it, so it being completely erased is not really accurate. It just means that people who can access it, it becomes a smaller group. So if you wanted to work for the FBI, but you did something, let's say you committed an aggravated assault when you were 12, believe me, the feds are going to know and want to ask you about that. So even if it was sealed, even if it was expunged, because of the type of job you were seeking, it's still not going to go away. You have to just deal with it. It doesn't mean that you can't overcome it. I'm just saying. So even with the expungement, there are limitations still.
Yeah, so they're in air quotes, expungement.
Right.
Air quotes.
And I think that's something that, you know, I know when I was working in juvenile justice, you know, I just thought that your record was automatically sealed, you know, that it was like, you know, not understanding, as a lot of people don't understand. I'm sure you understand, Teri, you can explain it more thoroughly than me, you know, that there's a whole process to get your record sealed even as a juvenile.
Right. And a lot of times it's making sure that it was done, because some juveniles have their attorneys, but in Georgia, I forgot what they're called. I just kind of forgot all of a sudden. Not the prosecutors, but those who were appointed. They're not defense attorneys, but that's kind of how they are. Not guardian ad litem, but to make sure that if it's available, that it's done. And what happens is a lot of people don't follow up with their personal business to make sure that it has been properly expunged.
Right.
Because you're right, they were entitled to it, but it's like, I thought my lawyer did that. That's what I hear all the time. I'm like, no. No, that's another process. You need to tighten that up.
So, I had another question, and it may or may not have any merit, I mean, for you, but have you noticed because of the new political climate, any changes or adjustments in your job and how you, I guess, go to work every day?
No, not at all. And unfortunately, in one way or the other, it hasn't really changed. Unfortunately, crime in Fulton County is still too high, still too much violence, still a lot of road cars on the road. And going to someone's point who was saying, you know, let's say a DUI. I used to be specifically a DUI defense attorney. And as a prosecutor, I was specifically trained to prosecute people who did not take the state test and did not do the field sobriety evaluations, those who what we call double refused. And I would tell jurors that, like, it might not seem like a big deal if the person was just pulled over on the street where they were weaving. But there aren't many streets in metro Atlanta where you're on the road by yourself. And with all of the traffic and cars moving in and out, do you need somebody on the road who has diminished mobility, whose judgment is impaired? And so it was more of an accountability issue of, most states have such invasive policies to make sure that you are not impaired, because we need everybody to be on full throttle, so that if you see a child running in the street, you're able to react. Somebody weave in front of you, you know, that you're able to navigate the traffic safely, because of the number of roads and the number of people on the roads, we need everybody. Clear heart, clear mind, you know, like, don't drive anxious, because that makes you an aggressive driver, all sorts of things. The last thing we need is for you to be impaired on the road.
Right.
So.
Right. No, you're right. I mean, I appreciate that, because I was the one who made the comment about the DUI. And I think from a public safety perspective, like, if you just go at it from that perspective, you know, it's obvious. Like, yes, you know, we need everybody. I mean, you're driving a multi-ton vehicle, you know, and we weigh like 125 pounds. You know what I mean? So, like, or whatever it is, you know. So, I think you're absolutely right. Well, is there anything else that you want to share with our audience, or things that we can do as politically inclined Black women to be aware of, to support, to advocate for? I mean, what would you ask the community organizers to do to support the work that you're doing?
You know, October is Domestic Violence Month.
It is, right.
And one of the things, domestic violence and breast awareness, is that the other one?
Yeah, that's breast cancer awareness. Yeah.
Breast cancer awareness, yes. One of the things that I think we lose sight of, and this is a big issue, but I'm gonna narrow it, is the idea of domestic violence only pertaining to male on female victims. Although those are the majority of the ones that we see, that's not all that I have seen in terms of being a prosecutor. I have seen men who were ex-NFL players, whose wives were itty-bitty, and they were forbearing. They wouldn't do anything, but they took a lot of abuse. And a lot of times people don't recognize that domestic violence begins with this whole, it's a mental thing. And so I would encourage our men to, and I say our, meaning larger than the Black community, to hold one another accountable about putting their hands on their women. And women being sensitive to other women who are caught up in situations of domestic violence. It's not so much, I love him, but it's also, I don't have the means and wherewithal, either the mental capacity or the financial capacity to take care of myself. So I'm victimized on more than one level. And those of us who think we're super women, and he ain't gonna do this to me, he ain't gonna do that, I'm gonna just tell you, I have a friend who was a prosecutor of domestic violence, who was a victim of domestic violence. She never would have thought she was in that position. So it doesn't care, the crime doesn't care who the victim is. And for us to broaden our concept of, there is a thing of spousal abuse, there is sibling abuse, there is same gender abuse. So everybody keep your hands to yourself. It's not just male on female. It's females putting their hands on men. There's a video I saw recently, you know, just that whole dating violence. This young lady had this man by the throat, and she wouldn't let him go. And he was like, please let me go. Let me jump in front of this train. Let me go. And it's this whole possessiveness. I don't know what that was, but it broke my heart, because a lot of times people think that domestic violence is just male on female. It's not. It's child against parent. It's larger than that. And when people are reaching out to you, if ever someone is saying, look, I'm trying to leave, I want you to understand they are the most vulnerable to attack by their batterer. When a woman wants to leave, it's a very dangerous time. Very dangerous time. And let me tie this into bail and bond. A lot of times, women who have been seriously hurt and killed by men in the context of domestic violence were slapped on the wrist with the first simple battery. It can quickly escalate. Most of the time, those men who ended up killing their wives, if you go back, there was a history of domestic violence. And in my mind, he shouldn't have been let out on bond. But that's just me. That's just me. And you shouldn't have had her in court saying, I want him to come back, because she's already victimized. So, to recap, everybody keep your hands to yourself. Look out for your neighbors.
Right.
If you see something, say something. Because little nosy neighbors help keep a community safe, because they be like, the people talk too much. Go to court. Watch what the judges are sentencing. Hold your local elected officials accountable. Vote. And contribute to your friends who you think are worthy of running. And I think that's it.
Well,
That's awesome.
That's awesome. That is awesome. That's a lot, and it's appreciated. And we have this segment in the show called Act Up, and it's just right in line with
Our Act Up.
what some of our Act Up items would be. Well, Teri, we really, really, really appreciate you joining us today and sharing some of your time and your wisdom. Your perspective. It's really valuable.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
That was very, I guess her perspective is one that I didn't have, not being a lawyer, definitely. And I'm glad we were able to get her on the show.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, it's important to have a balanced approach. And I think that's what she brought, was a balanced approach to criminal justice reform, and kind of talked about, what personal responsibility means in addition to overall system reform, and where there's some flaws with the system. So, well, I guess, Sabriya, we're moving on to our Act Up. And Teri gave us so many things, and I know you've been thinking about some things too.
But I want to add, because we brought up the October awarenesses, and I want to add in our climate, I want to make sure that we let everybody know that in October is also National Hispanic Heritage Month. That is from September 15th to October 15th. And then LGBTQ History Month is also during the month of October. In our current climate, I feel like it is important to celebrate our differences and our likenesses, and celebrate people who add to our communities, and our LGBTQ folks and our Hispanic folks, our brothers and sisters, definitely add flavor and spice and make this world a better place. My Act Up, however, is for you, for myself, all week long, or forever, for the rest of my life. Whenever I see a man or a woman in uniform who's defending this country, I'm going to thank them for their service, because the ultimate sacrifice that you can make is to give your life for your fellow man, and that's what these men and women go out to and do, and they may or may not come home. And so we want to thank them for their service and let them know that they're appreciated for doing a job that I'm not doing.
Right, and also I'll add to that, thank their families. There's hundreds of children and spouses and mothers and fathers that, are supportive to their sons and daughters when they make this choice. And I want to say thank you to them as well for the tremendous sacrifice that they are making in sharing your loved one with us, in support of the very best that our country has to offer. And that's democracy and freedom. And that's why we're even here, with this podcast. We're really, really blessed that we're able to come out and dissent and
right.
Analyze and disagree and comment and agree and support what our government does, and sometimes what they don't do. So thank you to the men and women for their service, and to their families as well. So I think that brings this one to a close.
Awesome. See you next week, or hear you next week, or you'll hear us next week.
So for Sabriya and Sheila, for Lamont, our producer, thanks for joining Black Women Talk Politics, and we will catch